Evolutionary Underground, episode 35, coming your way. Today, we're going to talk about TRT with Geneza Pharma. This is going to be a really fun episode. I'm really looking forward to this one. Really, we could do like a 3 hour show on this because TRT is one of the things that everybody I know is getting on. Anybody in their 30s, 40s, 50s that I talk to, they want to do TRT. Their friends doing TRT. Their friends saying how great TRT is. So they want to get on TRT. So we're going to talk about the TRT options. We're going to talk about what's cool about this podcast. We're going to tell you about TRT, what it means, what it is. We're going to talk about Geneza Pharma and how you can just, instead of going to the doctor and spending all this money and spending all this time going into appointments and having the doctor, you know, specifically overcharging you and overcharging to get the actual, the testosterone, you could just do it on your own. So self TRT. So we're going to talk about self TRT as well during the podcast. And we're going to talk about the different testosterone options that Geneza Pharma has. And then we're going to do a little fun after that, a little bit about some of the other alternate TRT options, because a lot of the anti-aging clinics nowadays, they're giving you a lot of different options. So we're going to talk about some of the options you could do on your own and have a little fun with that as well. So it's going to be a really fun episode, Mobster. So let's first get into Geneza Pharma a little bit. I want to bring in you. Tell me about the first time you used Geneza Pharma and what do you think about the gear overall?
I've not actually used their products, Steve, but I will. Feedback that we've had, we do these shows, and obviously we pay attention to what the guys are doing on the forums. Is that Geneza is becoming more and more popular just on the Evo family of forums, and literally in the anabolic steroid world. Honestly, guys, this is the way that you build up your reputation, and you build up trust. And a lot of what we do in steroid, I mean, especially here in the UK, Steve, and I'm talking about, and you can have this in America when you talk to people in the gym and whatever else, that sort of echoes over into the forums. So you start to have conversations and you say, oh, my last cycle, I ran this. My last cycle, I ran that. Now, it used to be a big time standing at the gym counter, talking to your gym buddies. And as often as not, products, brands, whatever, will come and go. Literally, sometimes in months, Steve. I've talked about on forums saying that the local lab, who I won't name because they don't exist anymore, they lasted 9 months. Okay. And they were very popular for the first few months. And then they kind of made a mess of it. And then one of the guys that had the share in the company disappeared. He unfortunately overdosed on recreationals or pharmaceuticals. I have no idea. Anyway, passed away. And this used to happen all the time. So what do we look at now? Okay, I've just looked at the catalogue, Steve, on Geneza Direct site. They have 269 items. That's multiple brands. But we're dealing specifically with their own brand. And this is what I'm on about. When I go into the forums, there are companies I've personally used. There are companies that trusted members have used. And the name Geneza comes up again and again and again. And it seems to be becoming more and more popular all the time. How does that work? Well, quite simply, good feedback. Good feedback is I used X and I had great results on X. Now, X could be Debo, it could be Geneza Debo, it could be that I only ran 30 milligrams of Geneza Debo and I gained 8 pounds. I've kept 6 pounds. That's, as Steve and I know, as the regular listeners will know, is a fucking amazing result. It could be things like, and this used to be a massive issue back in the day, but we're seeing less and less of this across all the brands. It could be zero infection, zero PIP. It could be that the product literally looks clean. We have seen, Steve and I have been around this game a long time. We've seen product that's arrived crystallized, that's arrived with bits floating in it back in the day. That doesn't happen anymore. And I'm glad to say that Geneza for sure is definitely one of those companies where I'm not seeing issues with sterility. I'm not seeing issues with post-injection pain. I am seeing people recommend it for the great results ahead. I am seeing great touchdown pictures. I am seeing this not only with Geneza themselves, but through resellers, becoming a more and more popular brand just with the resellers. And resellers will not put products on their site that don't shift. They want products that shift. So there's multiple things, Steve. You know, for example, and this is something that we've talked about on recent shows. We've had great discussions, you and I, on various sponsored podcasts where we talk about the in-house testing, the independent lab testing, and so on and so forth. So one of the things we mentioned recently, and I'm going to mention it now, is how we've had one or two members, one very recent, just in the last few days, and one that's regularly buying random products from all of the approved sources, including Geneza, that we recommend, having those products at his own expense sent off and having independent testing, not in-house, not by the brand, not by a reseller, but literally by someone that's willing to punt up the $1,000 or whatever it costs for him to send off a few batches of products, including Geneza, and having all of those products come back in so close to within range. I think the average score, percentage-wise, across 5 different brands, including Geneza, was 96 something percent, meaning pretty much every single product was as close to being on point and perfect as it possibly could be. There was no mistakes in what had gone in. Every single one contained what it was supposed to contain, and every single one was almost, as 96%, as close to the 200 milligrams or 250 milligrams it was possible to be. And it would literally be one sample, Steve, of each product. I know from looking at other companies and brands, they will take 5 or 6 vials and send them off, and one would be like 101%, one would be 99%, and so on and so forth. When you're talking about huge yields, that's fantastic. And Steve, historically, as we know, you and I are just about old enough to remember the mess that used to come out of the underground labs based in Mexico, the issues, seeing photographs of people with abscesses, and they've had to go to the emergency room to get treated and antibiotics and God knows what else. We have had issues like that within the industry, not on a real worthy of mentioning basis, probably for the last 15 years. And it's just getting better all the goddamn time. Almost all of our approved sources use great oils and alcohol blends and so on and so forth. So that almost, I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 examples in the last 12 months where someone said, oh, such and such product gave me a little bit of a sting. But even then, they still ended up with great results. I see more of those brands that we've never heard of, or sources that we don't recommend, than in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been on the forums. And even then, we're talking about a handful of times. This is great for the industry. And Geneza, as I said, is getting right up there as a brand to be recognized as a solid product, solid products from a solid brand that people rate and recommend. And again, something else, not just on our forums. I could say, Steve, that we're a little bit biased because we have a family of forums, we're familiar with the activity, but you don't see complaints on other forums. And when you think of the competition for sponsorship and approval and all that kind of stuff, the fact that a brand gets recommended everywhere, even on fucking Reddit, Steve, is a good sign that a brand is trusted by tens of thousands of people. And that's the reason why we talk about their products, and that's the reason why we're going to discuss TRT options specifically today on this show. Back to you, Steve.
So when it comes to TRT, obviously, you go to a doctor, you go to a clinic, they're going to write you a script. You're going to take the script to your pharmacy, and you're going to get pharmacy grade testosterone for your TRT. So you're going to know that you're getting good gear when you get blood work done, obviously. With Geneza Pharma, I've run Geneza Pharma many times. Other people have used Geneza Pharma many times, as Mobster said. But I've specifically run their test E, their test SIP. So I know, and I've gotten my blood work done, so I know their testosterone is legit. So if you're going to use something for TRT and you're going to use it and it's underdosed by 50% or even 25%, and your testosterone levels aren't where they should be, then guess what's going to happen? You're not going to get the proper benefits of TRT that you're wanting in the first place. So we want gear, we want a brand that's going to give you those pharmacy grade results that you're expecting and be dosed properly, as Mobster said. And that's what Geneza Pharma brings to the table. So you can go get Geneza Pharma yourself and use it for TRT, and you'll know. And you go to the doctor and you get your doctor to take a look at your blood work, and your doctor says, wow, you're using your own brand, you're saving money, which I can respect that, but I don't mind if you do it, because the doctor, that's what most doctors will tell you. Look, I don't mind if you get the testosterone on your own, just make sure it's legit, which he's right. Make sure it's legit. So you go and you get your blood work done, and the doctor looks at it and says, wow, this is just like pharmacy grade gear, and you're paying 75% less. And you're not having to come see me every 3 months or every 6 months and then have to do a follow-up appointment to take a look at your blood work again and do 3 different appointments and miss work. because doctors' offices are only open, during Monday through Friday and non-holidays. So it's like you got to miss work to go to the doctor. So you're saving time, you're saving money by doing it on your own. So you need a brain that's reliable. So Geneza Pharma is reliable. We know that from the blood work. We know that from not just the blood work, from what from, as Mobster said, they send out the gear to be tested anonymously on the forum. Pain in the ass veteran members who are looking for trouble.
A little bit anal. A little bit anal, Steve.
But we need
it's
that.
expensive.
Yeah. And they get it tested and they say, you know what? I can't find anything wrong with this. I'm trying to find something wrong, but I can't. And that's the gear that you want. So why? This is the idea behind using Geneza Pharma for TRT. Why go to the doctor and have him write your prescription? Why not just do it on your own? And of course, you can get your blood work done on your own as well. You don't even have to go to the doctor to get blood work done. But let's say you wanted the doctor to take a look at your blood work, whatever, you could go that route too. But so you can basically do everything on your own and save hundreds and hundreds of dollars, Mobster, by using Geneza Pharma. So that's important. So touch on that really quick, and then let's move on to TRT.
Two things. I always encourage, certainly if you've got genuine low testosterone, I encourage you to visit a doctor at least for the first time, Steve, an endocrinologist, as a good clinic recommended by other users and so on and so forth, to have proper blood tests. And of course, even if you do self-TRT later on, regular blood tests through the year, so you're monitoring the same way that a doctor would, as best you possibly can, and of course with our advice on the forum. Money-wise, Steve, it's a fucking fraction. I've done the maths, right? It can easily be at the slightly more expensive clinics, 300 fucking bucks a month for the equivalent of 1 or 2 jabs a month. Now you do the maths, Steve, right? And prices will vary. But if I take the UK price of £35, let's call that 40-something dollars, right? If I go to the gym and buy a bottle of testosterone over the counter, a vial, 10 ml vial over the counter, I call it 35 quid. I'm not getting a discount. I'm just buying the one goddamn bottle. It's 1 jab a week. 3 weeks, so it's like £3.50, about $4 or $5 a week. So you're talking about $20, $25 a month versus $300 at the more expensive clinic. Even if it's a cheaper clinic, it is a fraction. It's 1/5. The most expensive option would be 1/5 of the price that you spend at a clinic. You could pay $300 for the fucking year, Steve, versus $300, especially if you buy a bulk sale, discount, whatever, money off orders and stuff that we have on the site, versus going to a clinic. But I'd probably spend another $300, Steve, for blood tests and maybe an hour's getting talk to an endocrinologist, have them look at my bloods, see what's going on. Do I need to change the doses? This is if you're doing genuine TRT. I will also touch on very briefly, Steve, and you and I can argue the toss about the amounts. We've got what's called proper TRT, typically circa 120 milligrams a week. That seems to be about the average, the equivalent to 120 milligrams a week. Upper limit maybe 200, and very rare, like 1 or 2%, have I ever seen the upper limit of 300 milligrams. Sports TRT, I mean, the average person that self-TRTs, we're pretty much looking at 300 milligrams a week. I've very rarely seen people like to go much below that, certainly 200 to 300 milligrams a week. And what we call sports TRT, which is kind of really blasting and cruising, it really means that the upper limit is around 400 milligrams. But again, there are going to be issues with long-term fertility. I will emphasize, and I think this is important to say this regardless, it's kind of red flag, warning, whatever you like. Guys, please be aware that if you do use testosterone in any form for long periods of time, it will affect your long-term fertility. So what I like to emphasize, and especially in the younger listeners, is that TRT should really be, especially if medically prescribed, for life, for a very long period of time. I will underscore that. You need to understand that. It's not something you do for a year or 2 years and then come off and fingers crossed, right? So have that in mind. Steve and I are old enough that TRT is definitely on the table real soon, real soon. And if it's on the table, it will be in. I will be injecting until I die, Steve, until I'm a really old man and I don't care about these things anymore. It's not going to be something that I sort of lightly consider, go for 5 years, meet a girlfriend, decide I want to have babies, and then suddenly realize I wasn't doing TRT. I was just cruising for 5 years, and now, in fact, TRT is something you should genuinely have a proper understanding of. Come onto the forums, check out what we're talking about. read our articles on TRT and HRT. One last thing before we get into the whole testosterone options and TRT options that we would suggest from Geneza is the issue of how easy it is for the mature woman, menopausal specifically, to be treated with hormones, i.e. HRT, and how difficult it can be, especially here in the UK and some countries, and even in America, with the medical issues and insurance and so on and so forth, to try to get them to understand that low TRT is not good, that genuine TRT is quite often required, and it can be a giant pain in the ass, but it's real easy for a menopausal woman to go in. I'm the right age. If I was a woman, I'd be menopausal. And it would be a piece of piss for me to get hormones from the NHS here in the UK. But it's very difficult. I've known fellas my age talk about this, try to get the NHS to give them TRT, and if you're even vaguely borderline within a normal range, you've got no chance, Steve. So that's a bit annoying. But us guys, we can do this now, and of course with Geneza, you have the option. So guys, let's get on with it, Steve, and talk about the Geneza options that are on the table, and there are quite a few.
Yeah, and before we get to that, I just want to make people understand too, testosterone replacement therapy, as Mobster said, you know, be prepared to be on it for life. It's not one of those things we just try for a year. You know what? It's a trial. If I don't like it, I'll come off. Because what happens is once you're introducing exogenous hormones to your reproductive system, what's going to end up happening, and it's going to signal your pituitary glands to stop producing hormones. So once you
For a year,
once
Steve. You're shut down for a year. You're suppressed for a year. What do you think is going to happen, guys? Come on.
Yeah, and what happens is if you're on for a long period of time, at least 15 weeks, 20 weeks, 25 weeks, it becomes harder and harder for your reproductive system to ever come back. So you know, all my years on the forums, I've never seen someone who was on anabolic steroids, TRT for a long period of time, able to make a proper recovery. So
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical when I see these guys or YouTube videos like, oh, I came back, blah, blah, blah. They're probably just trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you a supplement.
I
They're
can
trying to
think of
sell you.
one person, Steve, because we've had people come on, ask about this, talk about exactly the same thing that comes up about, you know, meeting a girl, wanting to have a child. And maybe once I can recall someone coming back and they were successful. A lot of the time they'll come on, they'll ask for advice. We give them the best advice we can. We talk about baby mating protocols and the like a certain well-known guru. And then they go quiet, Steve. You don't get them coming back to tell you they've been successful. And that to me says that either they've been successful but they don't care. But I also think it more realistically says that they realize they fucked up and they're just going to go after the in vitro fertilization route. And let me touch on that as well, guys. And this is, again, it's one of those red flags because what we're talking about today is options, 4 things you can do if you really need it. And if you do properly decide that you're going to go on TRT for life. If you do end up with the IVF issue, I will say it is incredibly uncomfortable. It can be amazingly stressful for both parties, men and women. It's really uncomfortable for the woman. And I've seen videos of people crying and stressing out. I know personally the local IFBB pro and his wife have had major stresses from that. So it's not to be messed with. If you're a younger listener, you really need to understand what we're telling you here and emphasize that particular point. You won't get this on a lot of podcasts, but we like to think that we're kind of responsible, giving you good advice and so on and so forth. I think one more thing, Steve, and this is just I'm just going to throw this in now so that we can really get into the meat and potatoes of the options. And that's the sub-Q versus intramuscular, right? So some users that are doing TRT, and especially for life, have the option of intramuscular, meaning into the muscle, gluteal muscle, quad muscle, and so on and so forth, as an injection site, versus sub-Q. And sub-Q essentially is subcutaneous, meaning under the skin. Typically, it'd be someplace like the lower part of your belly where there's a little bit of skin you can pull away and you inject a very small amount. Some sub-Q users will inject a very small amount, aka microdosing, on an almost daily, if not daily basis. And this is literally because for them, the old intramuscular injection can be a literal pain in the butt. They don't like it. And also there's some argument that I've disputed myself. I don't see necessarily the logic in it, which is the quote unquote level test, meaning more frequent, i.e. subcutaneous daily injections gives you a more level of even, if you like, level of testosterone. I don't see the real need for that. Your body doesn't work like that. I don't think a very small amount on a daily basis affects your mood or your hormonal way that you feel and so on and so forth. It's just an option that some people have. It's on the table. Some people prefer it. It's just information is out there and available to you if that's the way that you want to go. Typically with a finer needle and a very small amount. We're talking about fractions of a mil here. I would probably go with intramuscular, Steve, and I would use a longer acting, which we're going to get into, purely simply because I'd only have to inject once every 2 weeks in some cases. Anyway, let's get into the options, as I say, Steve.
Yeah, and let me just speak for a minute, Mobster. And very important. I want people to before that you decide to do TRT, which is what I was trying to say earlier. Make sure you get blood work done, and make sure you really need it. I don't want to hear about people, that you shut down your natural testosterone levels. It's like basically cutting down your a money tree that's in your backyard that's making you money. So why shut it down when it's good? I've seen so many countless people go to these anti-aging clinics who don't even need TRT, and the anti-aging clinic convinces them to get on TRT. So they're replacing testosterone that they're producing naturally on its own with exogenous testosterone. Doesn't make any sense, but because the anti-aging clinic wants to make money. So get your blood work done, learn about the blood work, come on the forum, ask questions. Don't just hop on TRT without really thinking it over and discussing it with your spouse and realizing that there are risks of shutting down your HPTA, PTA for life, and there are risks to fertility for life when you do it. So I really can't stress that enough. And it's a huge mistake that people are making, is that they're hopping on TRT when they don't really need it nowadays in America, because it's way too easy to get TRT in America. Maybe 15 years ago, it was a little harder than it should be, but now it's way too fucking easy to get TRT in America. So you can just go to a doctor, and if he doesn't say yes, you just go to a different doctor, and he'll probably say yes. So most doctors, they're gonna okay it. Most anti-aging clinics, they're gonna okay it, but
Yes, the
they're
money,
not
Steve, the
going to
money.
tell you the risks. And I'm telling you these are the risks, and then don't you got to run the TRT properly. So a dosage for
Yes.
TRT is going to be somewhere between 80 milligrams a week up to 150 milligrams a week. No more. And if you're going to go more, you have to accept there's going to be side effects that come with it. So yeah,
Let me
really
jump in
quick,
again,
Monster.
Steve. Yeah, sorry, very quickly. Look, why the reality, two percentage realities. One is that testosterone levels, and this is just from American side, but trust me, it's the same in the UK, it's the same in Europe. So American researchers have looked at the testosterone levels of men in America, and I think Steve actually said this in a show that we recorded some time ago, Steve, and I think it was your uncle or your granddad was more manly than you are. He had better testosterone levels than you did, and it was for a couple of reasons, specifically to do with pollution, chemicals in the water, and so on and so forth, pollution in the air, etc., etc., and the fact that your granddad was probably eating more fresh fruit and vegetables and more organic, untreated, unmucked around with food than you are now. So that's number one. Number two, and I'm going to put myself, and to a lesser degree, because Steve's a little bit younger than me, on the table. Typically, the percentage of testosterone drops roughly around 35, 40 years of age, on average, 1% per year. So I'm 59 as we record this show, which means if I had a peak testosterone level when I was 40, 45, my levels have gone down 14% in those 14 years, Steve. It's just fucked up. There's also one more thing, and I'll put this on the table again. What Steve just referred to is what the clinical use of testosterone in TRT tends to be just to get you back in range. And I was listening, ironically, to Dave Palumbo yesterday, Steve, and he actually had a fellow on there that ran a clinic. And the argument was to do with the quality of lifestyle was quite well presented. And it was the difference between a medical prescription to get you back into range versus you feeling good. And the guy that ran the clinic and actually attends symposiums and conferences, etc., etc., said, I've got people that go to these conferences and they talk about, oh, I got them back in range. Success, congratulations. He says, yeah, but they don't feel any better than when they fucking didn't have it. They actually feel the same. He says, and surely when you're making someone well, they should feel better. So there's an issue with the low testosterone for how you can feel. This doesn't apply to everybody. But quite often, if you're a low T kind of person, and especially if your testosterone levels have dropped off for medical reasons, because you work in an industrial environment, age, and so on and so forth, a lot of it is about not just getting you back into range, but feeling just as fucking run down and as worn out and stressed as you did before, but actually slightly elevated, get you into a place where you feel great. You feel, for want of a better phrase, more manly, more likely to go out and kick ass, more likely to do well at work, more likely to be sexually active, and so on and so forth. And surely, and again, this is, I'll apply the HRT thing here, Steve. The whole thing with women in the menopause, and my mum had menopause when I was late 20s, felt, the night sweats, horrendous, aching joints, osteoporosis in older women. You literally feel like shit. They become hairier. That's why the old Italian grandmother with the moustache. I'm joking slightly, but that the hormonal upset, and honestly, a lot of women really struggle at that time with just how they feel. Men, for whatever reason, don't seem to be getting a square deal in that particular way, but it can affect some men really, really badly. So the thing that Steve also said with regards to the clinic, bottom line for a clinic is literally the bottom line. They're charging you $300, $200 because it is in their interest as a business to make money. And that's the reason why they will ask you to do more tests than perhaps you need to, that they'll have you come back on a repeated basis at $50 or $100 a fucking visit just for the appointment, and then give you overpriced testosterone and so on and so forth. If you've got that kind of disposable income, if you want pharmaceutical grade, you know where it's come from, compounding lab, etc., fine. But the reality of the situation is, if you do the things that we've talked about, and you are aware, and you've done the research, and you listen to this podcast, you have a much better idea how to, for want of a better phrase, to self-medicate, and certainly at a fraction of the kind of price. But again, please make sure that you are fully aware of all of these parameters that we're talking about.
Yeah, we get Mobster on a podcast because he can talk about this for a long. But we're gonna have more podcasts about this going forward, so definitely check it out. Well, let's get into what Geneza Pharma has to offer. And one of the we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna kind of go in a random order on this one. It's not order by popularity, but we're gonna start with GP Test Undecanate, and it comes in 250 milligram a milliliter. Now, the half-life on this is 20 days, and I've even seen some documentation where it was a little longer. So with this one, you really only have to inject it like once a month. So you would, in this situation, depending on, what you're trying to do, you might just do 1 cc once a month. You might do 2 cc's once a month, because that would put you a little bit over 100 milligrams on average. So the idea behind this one, this is for those of you who are for sure you're going to do the self TRT. You're not going to change your mind, because this stuff, once you start injecting the stuff, it's in your system a long time. Like literally after you stop injecting it, it's still going to be in your system for like 15 or 20 weeks afterwards. It's crazy how long this stuff is in your system. And so if you decide to change your mind, you're like 10 weeks into this and you decide to change your mind, well, it's going to be in your system for like 15, 20 more weeks on top of that. So it's really one of those things where if you want to go this route, this is for those of you who don't want to inject very often. You just want to inject a high volume of the gear in very, very infrequently. So that would be for you guys who want to do that. And this way you don't have to worry about having to inject every week or every other week or every 10 days, whatever. You can just go ahead and inject once a month, once every even month and a half, and you'll have this stuff in your system. So this is not used very often in bodybuilding or with people who cycle steroids, obviously, but it is used with certain people who are on long-term TRT and are not going to turn back at all. So this one, we don't see this one used very often, Mobster. Very, very rarely will anyone ever use this stuff. Anything you want to say on it before we move on?
No, that particular one, yes, Steve. Ironically, it's not the one that's industry popular, and I say that for TRT clinics, nor is it the one, ironically, that most people that are self-medicating and self-treating for TRT use. But it's surprising because I could see something like that at 250 milligrams. One, one injection of 2 mil once a month. That appeals to me hugely, Steve. The idea that I wouldn't have to do it, and again, especially for life, like you said, the next option, and I'll throw this one in, Steve, is the GP test SIP 250 milligrams. I would say test-cypionate is the number one TRT drug of choice. It's not the only one, but it's far and ahead of the others that any clinic is likely to give you, and certainly far and ahead of the self-TRT options. Even if you do sports TRT or you're doing it for the medical reasons, and you do know that you're on for life. For some reason, Decanate isn't number one. I don't know why that is. Cypionate is far and ahead in front of all the other options that are available. So, yeah, I mean, again, I could see me doing exactly the same amount because it's 250 milligrams. So 2 mil. Half-life, as Steve and I could argue about this on another show, we do pre-show research. We double check the statistics that we have in mind, and there's so many deviations. I've seen 21 days suggested. I've seen 14 days suggested. I would take the average of 14, so basically 2 weeks as a half-life. As Steve said, in reality, it's going to be in your system for far longer. Typically, something like another 20, 30 weeks easily. Especially if you're getting tested, etc., etc. But cypionate is the number one choice. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I haven't seen 14 days on SIP. I've seen
Just the one I looked at this morning, mate. Honestly,
yeah?
The first one I did this morning.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
usually
yeah.
I've seen anywhere from like 5 or 6 days up to 12, 10 or 12 days max. So it just
I've seen
depends.
21 days, 16 days suggested before. So I think what's happened, we actually had this on a recent
Maybe
show.
the active life is what you're seeing, not that.
Yeah, I think what it was also, I think what we've seen is that we had numbers that were given statistically some years ago, and then for whatever reason, those numbers have dropped, as I think we've had more information to refer to, more users, more clinics doing tests and so on.
So I can tell you this, okay, test SIP not only for TRT, but also for cycling in general. It's the number one seller. And I think, it's there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it's very smooth. And number two, it's got a long enough half-life where you don't have to inject it very often. So, you can inject it once. Usually 90% of people who are doing test SIP for TRT are going to inject it once a week. So you'll do half a cc once a week. That gives you 125 milligrams a week. There you go. Or you could do 1 cc every 2 weeks. And although that's not really done a lot of you will argue, oh, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't do that. No, actually, I know doctors who I've interviewed or people who have gone to anti-aging clinic, and that's actually what they've been put on, and they've gotten blood work done, and their blood work is perfectly fine doing it that way. So that's fine. So as Mobster said, whether it be 5-day half-life or 14-day half-life, whatever, the point is we know that it works, so you can inject it once a week or once every 2 weeks. So again, you're talking about between 2 and 4 injections a month. That's not bad if you're going to do something for the rest of your life. So that's not that bad of a pinning. The next one is Geneza Pharma test Inundate, very similar to test SIP. They're both smooth injections. They're
similar half-life, Steve.
Yeah, so I was saying, yeah, they're both similar. And that's number 2 most popular option. I know, Mobster, you don't like Test E for whatever reason, but I've used Test
Just
E.
never did anything for me when my mates loved it.
Maybe you just had a bad batch or something. Who knows? I mean,
we all got the same. I had the product delivered to me. I shared the product amongst the guys, and
maybe it was a placebo effect. I don't know.
I don't know. The SIP, for example. I mean, I know a bunch because I train with older gentlemen. One of my training buddies is 77 years of age, and the cypionate is number one choice of my older buddies. And the protocol that we tend to follow here, if you're doing TRT, I haven't started this yet, would be 3 on, 1 off. Again, this is just to prevent build-up in the system, to space out the injections, and typically 1 mil, 200 to 250 mil, depends on the product that they're using themselves. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, in AMFATE, not so much. And this is just locally amongst the older guys. But very popular amongst the younger athletes for one reason or another. I've had product which I loved, Steve, as you know, from the same brand, from the same companies, and other products that for whatever reason, like Anadrol, never seemed to get anything out of it, and in AMFATE, never seemed to get anything out of it. But my buddies loved it. They were raving over it, and we know it was the same batch, the same brand, etc., etc. It's just a personal thing. And guys, this is the option. We're giving you options for your TRT because even though cypionate is number one, You can use enanthate because it's got a similar half-life. You might have a preference for it. You might like how you feel on it. It might have one or two side effects that actually benefit you, whether that be, for example, water retention and so on and so forth. You might like that if you're super lean and super skinny and need to fill out a little bit and feel good because you're on CRT. So presenting you with options gives you different choices.
So next one, I'm going to bring in Mobster to kind of talk about this one a little bit. Not to preach, but to talk about it, because Geneza Pharma does have a warning on it on the website. Test E 400 milligrams a milliliter, not the 250 that I talked about, 400 milligrams. So this would be an option for you guys who want to inject a less of amount. So with this one, let's say you're going TRT at 200 milligrams a week. So you could do half a cc once a week, or you do 400 milligrams every 2 weeks and you get 200 milligrams a week average. But they give you a warning. They say, watch out for post-injection pain, which is PIP. They give you a clear warning. I'm so annoyed when people come on the forum and bitch. They're like, oh, I got high concentration gear. Well,
oh God,
we warned you. I've had clients come to me and they're like, Steve, I want to order the high concentration, blah, blah, and I warned them. I warned them like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, you may not like it. The post-injection pain is there. You may have to warm it up. You know what I'm saying? There's going to be some issues. You're going to have to dilute it. You're going to have to do that. And then they'll order it anyway. And they'll come back to me and be like, Steve, this is BS. I want them to refund me. I'm like, dude, I warned you not to get this if you're sensitive to I'm sensitive to post-injection pain. Even Test Sip, which is the smoothest gear, or DECA, which are the smoothest steroids out there to inject, I even get post-injection pain on those. So for me, if I take something that's going to increase my chance of post-injection pain, I got to steer clear of it. So this is one I would never mess with myself, even if I were to dilute it, even if I were to heat it up, even if I were to do everything. So I'm just warning you guys about this. Well, Mobster, talk a little bit about this. Maybe give some science behind why this happens as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked on previous shows about the late Rich Piana, and one of his more sensible videos, 10, 15 minutes long. I think he's sitting under Venice Beach Pier, and he's sitting on some rocks near the pier, certainly something like that, Steve. And he says, why did Big Pharma not develop products with high concentration? Listen, labs can create 500 milligrams per mil products, but they don't. It's possible. A chemist could make this for you. A compounding chemist could make this for you. Pharmacy. They could do it, right? No problem. The problem is, one, crystallization is going to be way more likely than something that's circa 150, 200, 250 milligrams, meaning you're going to literally have the product come out of solution, being dissolved, and start to crystallize. So then you've got to heat it up, warm it up, like Steve said. That's number one. Number two, and I've discussed this before, Big Pharma doesn't give 2 fucks when it comes to the cost. So if it was more expensive to make, they would charge you more. Big Pharma also had the issue of, for medical reasons, treating patients, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, even in the first few years of these products being developed for medical reasons. They had a huge number of people that they could go and talk to and say, did that sting? Did you have post-injection pain? Was there any nausea? Do you have swelling or infections at the site of injection? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, especially millions in the last 20, 40, 50 years, right? Absolutely. But they didn't do that. A huge deal would do it because customers ask for it. But the reality of the situation is exactly what Steve said. That crystallization is one issue. So you end up having a heat up, like Steve discussed. Then you've got post-injection pain. And literally sometimes, Steve, it can be the dissipation of the steroid from the site of injection getting into the body. Now, there's probably some biological aspect to it I don't understand, because I don't pretend to be an expert in that particular regards. But the reality of the situation is that we talk to listeners, we listen to members on the website, we have these conversations, we put out the warning like Steve said, and feedback is roughly, I would say, 8 out of 10 high potency 350 milligrams, 400 milligrams, or 50 milligrams, whatever. There have been a few rare examples of the higher end stuff. And 8 out of 10 users will complain about the post-injection pain. There might be, I'm actually going to say, Steve, that the other 20%, the other 2 out of 10, probably kind of perversely get off in the idea, I'm having this stuff and it's going to go in and I don't give a fuck if it hurts. And that's probably another reason we don't hear them bitching. And there's also the thing, of course, and I get this, and it's that thing of I'm not over keen on pinning myself multiple times per day. So anything that means I don't have to, I would use that option. So the idea that you can use a high potency injection or something long acting and then not have to inject another 300 milligrams, 400 milligrams for a week or 2 weeks or whatever will appeal to some people. And finally, and it's a little bit silly in this regards, people will occasionally see the dollar difference between a 350, 400 milligram or whatever product and a 250 to 300 milligram product and kind of work out it's ever so slightly cheaper. The reality of the situation is it isn't cheaper because you end up changing your mind and having to buy more product, or you have to find a way of diluting the product, and so on and so forth. You even have to throw the fucking stuff away. And trust me, steroid users are not crazy when it comes to money. This is, again, typical profile. I might be generalizing, but very rarely do we like to throw perfectly good steroid in the bin just because we were stupid enough to buy it and have it at high potency. But like I said, listen, right? Labs create what sells. Labs create what you ask for. I guarantee, and I could put money on the table right now, Stephen. I don't think any lab that we could discuss on these shows would find that the high potency ones are their big sellers. We've done a show on what sold. We literally did the top 5, top 10 steroids that sold last year in a previous show. And we know what sells, and we know what people like, and we know what works, and so on and so forth. And to these shows, we're talking to 90-95% of our audience would like to use products that are around 200 to 250 grams a milliliter. But again, for example, here, Steve, the two options that I'm looking at. One is GP testing Amphate, which has a EQ part to it, 200 milligrams of each. And the other one is a GP testing Amphate and Deca, both again with 200 milligrams. Now, that's almost, arguably, Steve, a stack in a vial. And of course, there are other products that GP do with testosterone blends that work specifically for that particular reason. But again, it's the high potency per milliliter that's the issue here versus whatever else. And again, TRT clinics. Why don't TRT clinics do this? Purely and simply because they would have had the same information come back to them as pharmaceutical companies, and that is feedback from the customer, the person that's on TRT. They'd be able to look at the bloods, be able to look at medical issues. They want to manage the patient. They want to make money out of the patient. And if these were money makers for them, they would sell them. So the reality of the situation is that hundreds of thousands of people that have been TRT for multiples of years have found what works for them is X, Y, and Z. It isn't the higher dose options. It's typically the lower dose, smoother to inject, more comfortable, more even testosterone levels once you're on the product, and so on and so forth. And again, this is from the medical reasons, the mood enhancement, before we get into the sports TRT side, which is about adding muscle, being able to train, lift heavy weights, and so on and so forth.
And some people love these high concentrations. A couple of the guys on the forum, I know one of the guys, I saw him make some posts about this. He's like, number one, I like injecting high volume. And number two, I don't mind the pain. I embrace the pain. I love the pain.
That's what I'm saying.
Some people do. Some people do. Some people actually inject it the day they're going to go work that muscle. Then they go work that muscle and they feel not only that lactic acid, but they'll feel that feverish part, where the muscle is getting inflamed, and they love that while they train. And they feel like, it helps them. And we've seen this before. And you mentioned Rich Piana. He had a lot of weird theories too about stuff like that. But some people have that belief. They don't mind it. But look, at the end of the day, for TRT, it's probably not going to be a good idea since you're taking it for the rest of your life. There's going to come a time where you're just being like, I'm sick of it. So I don't recommend it. But if you are not sensitive to post-injection pain, it could be really cool because you won't have to inject very much. So
let me give you what I mean. Actually, these are ones that we wouldn't normally see used.
So talk about that, and then we'll talk about the two blends of testosterone.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, right, we've actually seen Tren used for TRT, and something that Steve and I discussed on the pre-show. We actually talked about this, I believe, in a response to a query on one of the forums. Well, something along the lines of any steroid, anabolic steroid specifically, obviously, not catabolic, can be used as a TRT, okay? Because essentially it's testosterone, it's how that's in the system, and so on and so forth. So, touching upon what Steve said, and we are going to come back with a couple more
Yeah.
options.
So
Is the
Mobster is gonna, yeah, we talked about on the pre-show. We're gonna talk
sorry.
about some.
Specifically, I was going to say with trend, Steve, is that some users like to feel on trend, and so the night sweats and the insomnia, the quote unquote toxic sensation, literally is for them. I know when I'm on trend. I can feel when I'm on trend. So the idea of the high dose products being used by some users because they like, quote unquote, to embrace the pain is definitely, I know when I've injected this particular blend of steroids, it's high dose steroid, because I can fucking feel it and I know it's in my system, and I know that I'm going to go down the gym in a positive mindset and I'm going to kick ass, and I feel like I can grab the world by the balls. So there's an element of that with that almost discomfort and sensation of being on, versus, as I say, the medical reasons for TRT, which is typically very rarely for mood enhancement or quality of life. It's nearly always just to bring you back up to what's a good level for your age and so on and so forth. Yeah, talk about the other options now.
So there's a couple more. There's if you like blends, and some people just they believe in the clicking, whatever the blends help me. I feel better on the blends. I don't know what it is. But look, in your country, Mobster, Sustanon was developed. It was a Sustanon 250. Now, Geneza Pharma came up with their own Sustanon version, and it's a 270 instead of a 250. So what is the difference? They've got the testosterone decanate, which is an extremely long ester, 100 milligrams. They got the testosterone phenylpropionate, which is an intermediate ester, 60 milligrams. They have a testosterone isocaprate, which is also an intermediate ester, 60 milligrams. And then they've got the test propionate, which is a short ester, only 30 milligrams. And then they add in a testosterone acetate, which is 20 milligrams. Now, this one, in your country, Mobster, it's prescribed for TRT. You pin the 250 every 2 or 3 weeks. And it's designed, you do the 1 amp every 2-3 weeks. So you're pinning less frequently, a larger amount. So it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier with the testosterone undecanate. So you want to treat Sustanon as a long ester the same way. And that's what some people like to do. But again, Sustanon does come with some post-injection pain. So a lot of you may not like using it, but some people do. So if you're in Britain or Western Europe, a lot of the doctors there do prescribe Sustanon. And in the Eastern Europe, they prescribe something called Omnidrin, which is the exact same thing as Sustanon. In today, it wasn't the case originally, but today it is. So anyway, long story.
What did you say? Sorry, in a recent show, Steve, you actually talked about Sustanon, and we were saying why people were asking about front loading with Sustanon. You said it made no sense, and in fact, I think the comment you made at the end was this almost perfect for TRT because of the mixture of half lives with the different products that are
so
in
a lot
there.
of people they get messed up on Sustanon. A lot of you listening,
I love it, as you know.
So a lot of you listening might think, oh, Sustanon, some guy told me to take it every other day or something. That's for propionate. That's testosterone propionate. That's not Sustanon. So whoever told you that, they are really, really dumb and they don't understand how these esters work. So again, this is only 30 milligrams of testosterone propionate and 20 milligrams of testosterone acetate. Majority of the Sustanon are long esters. In fact, 100 milligrams of the 270 are extremely long. So it's just not true that you're supposed to inject Sustanon, very frequently. It's designed to be pinned a large amount infrequently, and each ester picks up one after another. That's the way they wanted to design it, and that's the way it should be ran. Now, when it comes to the Geneza Pharma Test Blend 350, this one is a mixture of Test E, 200 milligrams, Test Sip, 100 milligrams, and testosterone propionate, 50 milligrams. So this one, I would go ahead and pin this one probably every 7 to 10 days. That would be a good a dosage on it. And you could pin this one a very small amount. But again, watch out for the post-injection pain because I bet you it's going to be there. So this one may not be the best option for you for TRT, but we're just throwing it out there. And, at the end of the day, we're giving you their options. At the end of the day, you got to make the decision. From what we know, Mobster, the most popular TRT in America is testosterone cypionate, and number 2 is testosterone enanthate. So we really don't have to overcomplicate this shit at the end of the day. And those are Geneza Pharma's top 2 sellers regardless. So those are the best options, but we're giving you everything they have to offer, and you may want to try something different. And some people like the blends. Like I said, some people love the blends, some people don't. So those basically cover it. And then go ahead, Mom. Sorry, and we'll talk about some other TRT options which fly in the face of conventional wisdom.
I'm going to introduce that in a kind of way, Steve. When I've touched upon earlier in the show, and I talked about what we call sports TRT, and I said, ironically, it's kind of a bit messed up because we had the whole warning red flag conversation that both Steve and I emphasised when you talk about TRT for life. So there's an argument to be made for this in terms of being on a low amount of testosterone, typically 120 milligrams, around that level. And then when you quote unquote cycle, going up to a higher level, i.e., 400 milligrams, which you've also get sports TRT where the people really mean what I say was blasting and cruising. And again, we need to understand that TRT is for life. So a higher level of TRT, i.e., 400 milligrams, is kind of really a cycle. It's very, very close to, say, 500 milligrams. You're not too far away. And 400 milligrams, if it was given to you at a clinic, would probably bring issues in and of itself. But I want to talk about it as such because this comes into the idea that you can introduce other items, add them when you're on cycle. Just because you're on TRT doesn't mean you can't cycle. Doesn't mean you can't have periods of the year when you want to bulk up or when you want to cut down and so on and so forth. So there's definitely an argument to be made for increasing from, say, 200 milligrams a week, typically, to 400 milligrams a week. It's very, very close to a cycle, as I said. And an arguably, for example, me, I seem to respond with the odd two examples that I gave earlier on quite well to low dosages of, say, for example, SUS, DECA, and so on and so forth, even Tren. 400 milligrams for me, if I was on circa 200 milligrams, I can definitely see they have effects in the gym, Steve, with regards to my training. I can definitely see me lifting heavier weights for certain periods of the year. I can definitely see me, if I was a typical user, adding muscle for periods of the year. So talk about that with the options of adding other items to a TRT thing for that kind of stuff, Steve.
Yeah, and we see this a lot. People go to anti-aging clinics. You walk in there, it's like going to a fast food restaurant. It's really weird. They have like a whole board with different options to choose from, and not just using testosterone, but they have all kinds of different things that you can add to it. So
Yeah.
Geneza Pharma, they have other things too that you can add to TRT that you don't think of, like growth hormone, for example. And that's an option that you can look, and they have Cialis, they have Viagra. So Geneza Pharma has different options for you. They have different oral steroids. So some people, when it comes to TRT, they'll throw these in every now and then. So you can kind of call it like a blast and cruise type of thing. But let's say you just wanted to do TRT and you wanted to add in some Geneza Pharma Cialis or Viagra, maybe to make the spouse happy or whatever. You could do that, and that would be an addition to TRT. So there's different things. I've heard people use trenbolone as their TRT, believe it or not. But they use a really, really small dosage. So there's different options. We just want to kind of throw that in. It doesn't necessarily, when you're doing TRT, even though 95 to 99% of situations where people are doing TRT, you're using testosterone, but it doesn't always have to be just testosterone. It can be other things as well
Yeah.
that are that you
Let me
can.
touch on that for a second, Steve. And I was just thinking about it as you were talking. So those people that follow my log on the forums will be familiar with the fact that I mentioned from time to time by name that my two buddies that were regularly training with me on the bench press. And as you know, I've got a fairly decent level for a 59-year-old motherfucker, 400 pounds plus bench press. Now, my two buddies, one's in his early 50s, Chris, and the other fella, Ken, is in his late 70s. Um, Chris is probably coming back to it, so he was still progressing up to a particular point and was using a relatively low dose cycle. But Ken has been on a form of TRT, self TRT, for a very long period of time. Looks a lot younger than he's 77, has a great bench press for a 77-year-old, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I think I kind of fucked them up, burnt them out a little bit because one's gone back to regular full-time work and struggling to get in the gym. And I think I won't say I hurt Ken, but he's on TRT, so he's not cycling and he's not changing the doses. Whereas when I was killing the bench press to the maximum, I was on cycle and I'm not on TRT. So you got me going gangbusters and Ken still on his regular levels of testosterone. So this is where this stuff comes in. But the options of adding something to your cycle makes sense. If you decide, for want of a better phrase or better example even, to bench press with. You want somebody to you probably want to cycle when I'm cycling. You probably want to peak when I'm peaking. So, for example, you can add orals that Geneza has. You can even do, as Steve said, the other options. There are different things you can try up in the dosage so that when you are bench pressing with me, you're on 300 milligrams or 400 milligrams and so on and so forth. But again, all this is, listen, right? Geneza has great TRT options. You have the ability, as we said, to use the two most obvious examples that we presented to you, decanate and cypionate with the super long-acting esters, and the cypionate being the number one, and an amphate probably being the number two choice, and decanate for whatever reason just isn't. You have the ability to go to a clinic and ask for certain brands sometimes at clinics, Steve. It's almost like a sweet shop going into different choices. You can look at what your reason for doing TRT. You have to understand that, for example, a low level is literally going to improve your blood markers and get you within range. A slightly higher level is going to elevate your mood, make you feel good, enhance your training. And that's just on a normal level. And then there might be periods of the year when you decide to up the dose and get into what is, in essence, a blast and a cruise. The cruise is really a TRT, but the blast is elevating or adding other Geneza options to your stack, to your TRT, and taking yourself up a notch. And I think this applies whether you're an older person or a younger person, but it's typically we're talking about a more mature gentleman, 30, 35 years of age plus, that typically would be a TRT customer. You're looking for that period of year when you want to get into shape for the same reasons as a young man, which is looking good for the beach, feeling good, for business, being able to stand with a shirt and a tie and look good at the conference table as a politician, and so on and so forth. And the benefits of TRT are incredibly well known. That sense of well-being, the manliness, the grabbing the world by the throat, they kick ass. I know a salesman that do it, politicians that do it, average Joes that do it, and some of them will tell you it's been an absolute life changer, Steve. And the way that they feel, their sense of well-being, etc., is so much improved. Now, make sure you understand, as we said at the beginning of the show, we emphasize this and we emphasize it at the end. You must understand the following, and I think any responsible brand or company and ourselves would say this to you, and a clinic, whatever else. The preference would not be for younger people, the more mature gentlemen, because typically, and it's almost impossible to change that, and it's incredibly rare, as we just discussed earlier on, the idea that you can do TRT for 5 years or 10 years or whatever because you decide you're going to go on for life. And younger guys, you will change your mind. You will realize that you want to have children. And a lot of educated, college-educated, diploma, degree, etc., are leaving it later in life to have kids and finding that the fertility is all over the place. And it will happen if you go on TRT when you don't need to. So make sure you're aware real, genuine TRT is for life. It's not something you do for 6 months or a year and change your goddamn minds over. It will fuck with your fertility. And if you're not prepared for that, maybe you will need to wait. Maybe you need to do a rethink. Geneza will be waiting for you. Their products are sounding good to go and are becoming more and more recommended on a daily basis, Steve. We are seeing people that were not even asking, we're seeing Genezas in their stacks. We know that they're a good, solid brand. We highly rate and recommend them. And there you go, guys. If you've got any opinions on TRT, if you run things differently, if you tried Geneza products, we want to hear from you in the comments. Come onto the forums. Tell us what you think. Let us know. Please note, we are not doctors and opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. And podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.